I want you to understand something about who I was when this happened. I was not a superstitious person. I was 17 years old, and I thought I was the kind of person who had the world reasonably figured out. Not arrogant about it, just settled in the assumption that things had explanations. And that the explanations, if you looked hard enough, were always rational. I believed in science. I believed in psychology. I believed in the ideomotor effect, which is the name given to the phenomenon where people move a planchette without realizing they are doing it, where the subconscious produces movement that the conscious mind attributes to an external force. I had a ready answer for the Ouija board. I was wrong to be so ready. There were 5 of us that night. A late summer evening in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of town where there is not a great deal to do on Friday nights when you are 17 and nowhere to go. One of us had brought the board, a standard one, the kind sold in toy stores, the kind that marketers had decided was suitable for children, despite the fact that what it is designed to do is communicate with the dead. We set it up in someone's basement, dim lighting, candles, because that is what you did, because the atmosphere felt required, even if you didn't believe the atmosphere mattered. We asked general questions first. Is anyone there? What is your name? How old are you? The planchette moved. It always moves, I told myself. Someone is always moving it unconsciously, and the pattern-seeking brain assembles the movement into meaning the way it assembles faces from random shapes. I was rational about it, right up until the moment I wasn't. We had been going for maybe 40 minutes, enough time for the initial nervous energy to settle into something more like genuine attention. And then someone asked the question that I wish, with everything in me, they had not asked. Does anyone here have something we need to know? The planchette moved. It moved to Y, then E. S. It spelled a name. The name of one of the people in the room. One of us sitting in that circle, hands on or near the board, breathing the same candlelit air. The person whose name was spelled went still. Very still. The kind of stillness that is not composure but shock. We asked, what do you want us to know? The planchette moved again. Slowly at first, then with increasing certainty. A date, day, month, year. A date that was approximately 1 year from that evening. We sat there looking at what had been spelled. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then someone laughed. Not a real laugh, not the sound of a person who found something funny, but the sound of a person releasing pressure, and said something about how morbid it was, and the mood in the room shifted to something that was trying very hard to be dismissive. We put the board away. We talked about other things. We went home, and every single one of us, I believe, carried that date quietly with us. In the weeks that followed, nobody brought it up directly. We were 17. We were skilled at burying the things we could not process. But I noticed the way the person whose name had been spelled sometimes went quiet in the middle of an ordinary conversation. The way they would look at something just past whoever was talking, briefly, and then come back. I do not know if they were thinking about the date. I could not ask. About 6 months after that night, they were diagnosed with cancer. A rare form, aggressive, the kind of diagnosis that rearranges the entire future tense of a person's life with a single word. They told us over a weekend in early spring. I remember where I was standing when they told me. I remember looking at them and feeling the date surface in my memory with a precision that was almost physical. The diagnosis came with a prognosis. Not exact, but the doctors were clear about the general territory. The general territory overlapped with the date. They died in the following summer, not on the exact day, a few days before, and I have spent years turning those few days over, trying to decide what they mean, whether the inexactness dissolves the coincidence, or whether it is close enough to constitute something, whether a date spelled on a board by a planchette, moved by the unconscious hands of 5 teenagers in a basement, can mean anything at all. I have talked to people who are certain it cannot. I have talked to people who are equally certain it can. I sit somewhere in the space between them. I sit in the space of someone who cannot fully commit to the rational explanation because I was there. Because I felt the mood in that room when the name was spelled. Because I saw the face of the person whose name it was. Because I know, with the specific knowledge of someone who was present for both events, that what was spelled that evening and what happened in the summer of the following year are connected by something I cannot name. Not superstition, not wishful thinking or its dark mirror. Something that I felt in that basement, the way you feel a change in temperature. Not through analysis, but through the body, through the oldest part of the nervous system, through whatever part of us still knows how to recognize things that the rational mind has not yet caught up to. I have not touched a spirit board since. I have not been in a room where one was being used since. I do not think anyone should ever ask it if someone is going to die. I think some answers once given cannot be put back. And I think that is the thing the board understands, that we do not. That knowledge has a weight, and that the weight does not lift. I want to start by telling you that I come from a family of skeptics. My father is an engineer. My mother taught mathematics for 20 years. These are people who live in a world of provable things, of equations that balance, of structures that hold because the physics says they should. Ghost stories were not part of the vocabulary of my childhood. The word paranormal did not come up at the dinner table. If something could not be measured or explained, my family's response was not wonder. It was a shrug. So when I tell you that what happened the summer I was 15 changed something fundamental in my father's relationship to the idea of the unexplained, I want you to understand the weight of that. This is not a credulous family. This is not a family that goes looking for experiences to believe in. This is a family that had an experience arrive uninvited. It was a summer evening. My mother and her friend, a woman she had known for years, practical and level-headed in her own right, had gotten a Ouija board as a kind of lark, not because they believed in it, because my mother's friend had found it in a second-hand store and thought it was funny. My father and my mother's friend's husband were in the next room watching television. They wanted no part of it. My brother and I were with my mother and her friend in the living room, sitting on the floor around the board. I was 15. My brother was 12. We were curious the way teenagers are curious about the things they have been told are ridiculous, with exactly enough skepticism to pretend we did not care, and exactly enough genuine interest to sit down and try. We asked the standard opening questions. Is anyone there? The planchette moved to yes. What is your name? It spelled a name, S. We looked at each other. None of us knew a Swan. Not a person named Swan, not a family named Swan. The name meant nothing to any of us. My mother asked, "Are you connected to this family?" The planchette moved to yes. My mother's friend asked, "How?" The planchette began to spell again. It spelled a relationship, a familial connection to my father, something on his side. We stopped the session shortly after, not because we were frightened. At that point, we were intrigued and bemused more than anything else. We stopped because the planchette had gone quiet, and the energy in the room had shifted in a way that was hard to name, a kind of heaviness that made continuing feel like bad manners. My mother said goodbye to whatever was there, the way the instructions told you to. She moved the planchette to goodbye. We went into the next room and told my father what had happened. We told him the name, Swan. I watched his face. I watched the color leave it, not gradually, all at once, the way a light goes out, there and then not there. He set down the glass he was holding. He asked us to repeat the name. We did. He was quiet for a long moment. And then he told us he had an aunt on his father's side, a woman who had died very young, before my father was old enough to have any real memory of her. A woman he had never spoken about to us because she had died in circumstances that were painful to the family and had been one of those family losses that gets placed carefully in a drawer and kept there. Her last name by marriage was Swan. None of us had known that. None of us could have known that. My father had never told us, not once, not in passing, not in any of the hundreds of hours of family conversation that accumulate over a childhood. The name had not appeared in any photograph we had access to, any document, any piece of family history that my brother or I had ever been shown. The board had spelled a name that existed only in my father's memory, in the part of his memory he had kept closed. He left the room. He was gone for about 20 minutes. When he came back, he told us very quietly that he did not want the board in the house. He was calm about it. My father is always calm, but there was something underneath the calm that I had never heard in his voice before. Not fear exactly, the sound of a person who has just had the architecture of their worldview disturbed in a way they have not yet had time to process. He did not explain it away. He did not construct a rational account. He simply said he did not want the board in the house, and we understood from the way he said it that the conversation was finished. He has never spoken about it since, not once in the years that have passed since that evening. I have asked twice carefully, in the way you approach closed doors in families. Both times he has changed the subject with the practiced ease of a person who has decided definitively that some doors do not need to be opened. I understand that. I think about it sometimes, about the woman named Swan who died young on my father's side of the family, about whatever part of her, if any part of her persists, found a way through a toy store board on a summer evening to a living room full of skeptics, about what she might have wanted to say that we did not think to ask, and about my father's face when he heard the name, the color leaving it all at once, like a light going out. I know how this sounds. I know exactly how this sounds because I am the same person who would have heard it the way you are hearing it right now, and would have filed it under things that people say happened. I am not given to dramatic interpretation. I am not a person who has had many experiences I could not account for. I had one. This is it. I was in my late teens, staying with extended family for a long weekend in the summer. There were 4 of us in the house that night, 2 cousins and a friend of theirs who was also staying over. And me. The adults were out. We had the house until late. Someone found a board. I say found because that is the word my cousin used, as if it had appeared rather than been retrieved, as if the specific framing mattered. We set it up in the basement. The basement was the kind of finished basement that exists in Midwestern houses of a certain era. Low ceiling, wood paneling, carpet that had been there since the 80s. A single small window near the ceiling that showed a strip of dark yard outside, comfortable enough in daylight, different at night. We started the session around 10 in the evening. The board responded. We made contact with something that identified itself with a name I will not repeat here. A Russian name. A name that none of us recognized. A name that had a heaviness to it when spelled out, that I registered before I had decided whether I believed any of it was real. We asked the name how it had died. The planchette moved. It spelled murdered. We asked who had murdered it. It spelled a name, an ordinary name, a first name only. We asked where. It began spelling a location, and then the planchette went abruptly to goodbye. Not by any of our doing, just moved directly to goodbye, and stopped. We sat back, looked at each other. The energy in the basement, and I use that word carefully, knowing how it sounds, had changed. The air felt different, heavier and colder than it had been when we started. The light above us, which was a single overhead fixture, seemed less adequate than it had before. Someone said, "Should we close it?" And someone else said, "It already went to goodbye, isn't that closing it?" And the answer, which we did not know at the time, was no. The board going to goodbye does not close the session. You close the session, you move the planchette deliberately to goodbye yourself. You state clearly that the session is ended, and then you put the board away. What we did instead was stand up, leave the board open on the table in the center of the basement, and go upstairs to make food. We were teenagers. We were hungry. We were slightly spooked and slightly exhilarated and entirely unprepared for what we came back to. We were upstairs for about 40 minutes. We came back down to the basement and the change was immediate and complete. The temperature drop was the first thing, not the ambient coolness of a basement in summer. Something else, something localized. The cold of the air near an open window in January, present and total and wrong for the time of year, and the sealed room. The second thing was the floor. Books that had been on the shelf beside the stairs. Paperbacks, the kind of accumulated reading material that lives in family basements for years, were on the floor. Not all of them. A selection, arranged in a spread across the carpet between the stairs and the table where the board sat. Not knocked off haphazardly. Arranged, spread out flat, open face down, in an arc that curved from the base of the staircase toward the board. The board itself was exactly where we had left it. Exactly as we had left it. Planchette in the center. Open. We stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the books on the floor, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. And then my cousin said, in a voice that was doing considerable work to remain level, "Close it." We went to the board. We put our hands on the planchette. We said aloud that the session was closed. We moved the planchette deliberately to goodbye. We said goodbye. We put the board face down. We went back upstairs, and we did not go back to the basement until morning. In the morning, in the daylight, my cousin's friend found something on his forearm. 3 parallel marks, Not deep, not wound level, the kind of marks that skin makes when something has drawn across it with moderate pressure. Scratches. We asked him when he had noticed them. He said he hadn't seen them before the session. He said he hadn't felt anything. He said he didn't know how they'd gotten there. I have thought about what happened in that basement many times. I have thought about the cold, about the books on the floor, and the specific deliberateness of the way they were laid, about the scratches on skin that were not there before we went into that room. And I have thought about the 40 minutes we left the board open upstairs, about what 40 minutes of an unclosed session in a sealed basement in summer produces, about whether whatever spelled murdered into the early hours of that night was something that had been waiting a long time for someone to open a door, and whether we, in our carelessness and our hunger and our teenage assumption that nothing real could come from a toy, had left that door open just long enough. I do not use boards anymore. I will not be in a room where one is being used. That is not superstition. That is a decision made by a person who came back down a flight of stairs and found the room rearranged. Cold, the book, scratches. It is a decision made by someone who understands now that some things you open cannot be closed simply by walking away. I was a freshman in college, and I was not afraid of very much. That is the honest starting point. 18 years old, first time genuinely away from home, in a city I was still learning, in a building I had lived in for 6 weeks. The building had a history, not the kind of history that gets mentioned on campus tours, but the kind that circulates through dorms in the first weeks of a semester. The kind that passes from upperclassmen to freshmen over dining hall tables and study sessions. The building had been a morgue, not recently, decades ago, before the university had expanded, and before the land had been absorbed into the campus, and before the building had been gutted and converted and repurposed into the place where I was now trying to organize my textbooks and figure out the laundry machines. It had been a morgue. I do not know how many people had known this before the semester started. I did not know it until I had already unpacked. The dorm had a reputation, the kind of reputation that accretes around a building over years. Small incidents, small strangeness, the specific quality of certain rooms at certain hours that people noticed and mentioned and filed away and mostly did not act on. I was not the kind of person who acted on reputations. I was the kind of person who thought the history was interesting and mildly atmospheric, and not something that required serious engagement. And then someone on my floor produced a Ouija board. There were 7 or 8 of us. A Friday night, nothing in particular to do. The casual gathering energy of a new semester and new people still in the process of figuring each other out. We set up in one of the larger rooms, lights low, someone had candles. We started, the board responded immediately, not after the usual long waiting period, where fingers hover and nothing seems to happen. Immediately, the planchette moved with a purpose that registered as different from anything I had heard described before. Not slow, not tentative, but purposeful in a way that silenced the room. We asked who was there. It did not spell a name. It spelled a word, demon. Someone laughed, the nervous kind, the kind that means the opposite of what laughter usually means. We asked how many. The planchette moved with complete certainty to the number 8. Then 3, 83. The room was quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a group of people engaged in something together. The specific, pressurized quiet of a room where everyone is having the same reaction and nobody wants to be the first one to give it a name. Someone asked, "What do you want?" The planchette moved, it spelled, and then before anyone said anything else, 2 things happened in very quick succession. The candles went out, all of them simultaneously. Not blown, not flickering first and then dying the way candles die in a draft. Out, together, in the same instant, and then the lights in the room came on. By themselves, nobody was near the switch. We had set up away from the switch deliberately. The lights came on, and we sat in fully lit silence looking at the board and looking at each other. And the mood in the room was not the manufactured spookiness of an hour ago. It was something else. It was the mood of people who have asked a question and received an answer they cannot fully account for. We closed the session. We closed it properly, deliberately, with intention. We said goodbye and we moved the planchette and we put the board away. We did not sleep well that night. Not one of us. The following days were the beginning of something that lasted for the rest of that semester. Electronics turning on and off in multiple rooms on the floor. Not one room, not one person's belongings. Multiple rooms, multiple people. A pattern of interference with devices and lights that spread through the floor the way rumors spread. One person, then another, then a third, comparing notes and finding that what they had individually written off as a malfunction was something shared. The girls at the end of the hall could not sleep. Not because they had been at the session, some of them had not been, but because something had changed in the quality of the air in that building after that Friday night. The floor assembled itself into the kind of shared problem solving that happens when a group of people are collectively experiencing something they cannot individually resolve. Someone called a priest. I want to be honest about the fact that calling a priest was not something I had expected to be part of my college experience. I was not a particularly religious person, but I was also not a person who had experienced what had been happening on that floor. And by the time the priest came, I was not in a position to feel superior about any solution that was offered. He came on a Tuesday. He walked the floor. He went into each room. I was there when he came to mine. He did not say much. He did not perform. He walked in and stood for a moment, and then he said, very quietly, that the building had a very heavy history, and that what we had done in opening a channel of communication in a space like this was something that required serious undoing. He said he had blessed a lot of spaces. He said he had not felt anything like this building in a very long time. He completed what he came to do. He left, and the things that had been happening on that floor stopped. Not gradually, the way the candles had gone out, all at once. I do not know what to do with any of this. I am not a person who has reconstructed my understanding of the world around that semester. I am not someone who now believes in the literal existence of 83 demons waiting beneath a college dormitory. What I am is a person who sat in a candlelit room when the candles went out together, who watched the lights come on by themselves, who lived through the month that followed on that floor, and who watched a priest walk through a building and come out looking like a man who had done something more difficult than he had expected. I think about the morgue. I think about the decades of what that building was before it was a dorm, about how many people had passed through it in the worst moment of whatever had come before, about what collects in the walls of a place like that over time, about whether some places have a specific kind of weight that makes them different from other places, about whether opening a board in a room that was once a morgue is a different thing from opening it anywhere else. I think it is. I think some places make the distance shorter between here and wherever the other side of that board leads. I think some places are closer to that line than others, and I think a dormitory built on a morgue is one of them. I have not used a board since. I have not been back to that building, and on the nights I cannot sleep, I think about the candles, the way they went out together, all at once, the way things go out when something else comes.